everyone, Ryan here from Fight Game Analysis, and today we're going to be talking about the fight that just wrapped up between Ryan Garcia and Emmanuel Tagoe. Before we jump into that, if you've been enjoying the content, please go ahead and click on the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate your support. Alright, so just last night we saw the return of Ryan Garcia. Been waiting on it for a little while, been a minute since he's been in the ring. Since then, he switched trainers. Used to work with Eddie Reynoso, training out of Canelo's camp. Now he's working with Joe Goosen. So there was a few things that were going on, a lot of anticipation going into this, and we finally got to see him back in there last night. Now look, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinions, the conclusion of this one was foregone. Ryan Garcia was like anywhere from a 17-1 favorite to a 20-1 favorite, depending on where you were getting your odds from, right? So pretty much everybody, Vegas, fans, all the way around the board, almost everybody considered this to be a dominant type display. He was predicting an early knockout. His new trainer, Joe Goosen, was saying that he was going to be absolutely shocked if this one went the distance. Right? So that's kind of the mindset that we have going into it. Now, before I offer my opinion on anything, kind of just, like I said, the post-fight review, let me also say one thing, that everything that I'm saying is from the perspective of who Ryan Garcia is perceived to be. Not only today, but also who everybody predicts him to be in the future. Right? We're not talking about some guy who's a no-namer with 15 fights that nobody's ever heard of, that doesn't have an amateur background, and then kind of looking at his work. We're talking about a guy who's mentioned among the best of the division. We're talking about a guy that people talk about as a future champion, potentially the man at 135 pounds or 140 pounds or 147 or wherever it is he chooses to campaign. He's got a big frame. He's young. I'm sure he's going to move up in weight as he gets a little bit older. Right? But people talk about him as potentially being the best one day. He talks about potentially being the best. He talks about getting the biggest fights. He constantly calls out the biggest name guys in the division. So everything that I'm thinking about, everything that I say, is from the perspective of a guy who's supposed to be the best or is supposed to be the best in the very near future. 2 years, possibly 3 years, something along those lines, right? So keep that in mind. Now, let me start off by saying I wasn't impressed. I was typically when I make post-fight reviews, I like to do it right after the fight. I watch the fight and make the video. It's when it's most fresh in your mind. It's when you've got the first take on it and things like that. I watched that fight last night and I immediately knew I didn't want to make one right away. That fight was kind of ugly, had a weird rhythm to it, had a weird vibe. I knew I was going to have to watch it again. I wanted to sleep on it, woke up this morning, watched the fight again, kind of to digest it a little bit, get a better feel for it before I made the video. Still didn't like it. Still thought it was an ugly performance. Still not impressed by it in any way, shape, or form. Right? Now, really, I boil it down to three things. Number one, the jab was ineffective. Ryan Garcia did not go in there and effectively use the jab. Now, look, I understand he was dealing with an opponent in Tagoe who was all over the place, man, constantly circling to his left, constantly on his bike, moving all the time, particularly in like the first 6 rounds. Right, a little bit here and there, he was setting his feet, but for the most part, this dude was using an incredible amount of movement to the point of considering running all over the place. And I understand how frustrating that can be. Nevertheless, he did not use that jab effectively. He was never able to go in there and nail him down with that jab. He was never able to go in there and use that jab to frame him and kind of set up the rest of his work. If you want to think of a guy who does that particularly well, you think about Errol Spence. He's got this way of going in there and using a combination of his jab and his footwork to just really frame a guy, set him up, and then be able to land his bigger shots. Ryan Garcia wasn't able to use it to do that. He wasn't able to use that jab to manage distance. He wasn't able to use that jab pretty much for anything. The jab, when he did use it, he was throwing it, sure. Sometimes he scored with it, but overall, it's easier to think about those as kind of like just one punch at a time. He's landing his jab versus thinking about the jab as part of a bigger game plan and what you're using it for, right? He really didn't do that. Number two, he did not control the gap well. Constantly throughout that fight, he was going in there and he was overextending on his punches. He was getting off balance. He was reaching. He was squaring up his feet sometimes against the ropes. He was leaning in and getting so close to his shots that he was smothering his work, which was doing two things. One, not allowing him to get off better combinations. And two, it was allowing his opponent to get out of there. Usually he was circling out once again, getting to his left, causing separation. And number three, kind of goes a little bit with the second one, but he wasn't cutting off the ring well. There were multiple times throughout this fight where he had his man in the corner. And based on the angle he was taking, his punch selection, a lot of times he'd like to come in and kind of lean to the left, pivot a little bit to his left, probably because he's got such a dominant left hook, but that would just allow Tagoe to get out the back door, constantly circling out. There were so many times that Ryan Garcia would have his man in the corner where you're supposed to keep him. He would let him out, come in, throw like maybe 1-2 punches. He would get in too close. He would take the bad angles, and his guy was out of there. So in that regard, it was a disappointing performance. You know, it was funny. They interviewed Jojo Diaz. I want to say it was like the 7th round. They brought him in. They asked him what he thought, and he's like, "Dude, I need to drink some coffee to stay up during this fight. This one's ridiculous." You know, this Ryan Garcia should have had a guy out of here of this caliber. A man who's a guy who's not a big namer. He should have been able to have him out of here in a couple rounds. He didn't. And the reason he can't is because he's not a ring general. He doesn't know how to go in there and enforce his will on a guy. He doesn't know how to take control of the situation. I mean, yeah, he had the center of the ring. He was applying this incredible, crazy pressure, but there's more to it than that. There's way more to being a truly polished, skilled boxer and going in there and applying your craft at the highest level than just being athletically gifted, fast hands, fast feet, go in there. You catch a guy with a left hook, he's done. It's like, man, that looks great when you got guys who are standing in front of you. That looks great when you got guys who are playing ball. But his man didn't play ball last night, and he didn't look great. Yeah, I get it. He's able to get some shots off here and there, particularly when Tagoe tried to stand his ground. You know, Garcia was able to land some body shots and this and that. But overall, when you look at that as an overall work of performance, and you're talking about a man who's predicted or aspiring, or people think that he's going to be potentially the best in the world one day at 135 pounds? No way, man. No way. It really makes me question where he could go with this, right? And I know you think that sounds like an over-exaggeration. It sounds like I'm reading too much into one fight. But it's not one fight. It's one fight now. It's not one fight out of the picture of an entire career, right? When I talk about the jab, when I talk about controlling distance, when I talk about cutting off the ring, these are fundamentals of boxing. I guarantee you, Joe Goosen, if he were to catch a super young dude, 10 years old, and he were to train him, he's drilling those things into guys long before they reach main event status. Long before they're shining under the bright lights, they're supposed to have these things down. These are things that are taught very early in a boxing career, and then they're mastered over the course of that career. Ryan Garcia did not look like he had been working on those things throughout the course of his career, and that he just had a bad night. Like, dude, I thought it looked bigger than that. I thought that these are things that he's supposed to be able to do better at this point against an opponent of that caliber. And the fact that he couldn't makes me really question when he's going to be able to master him to a high enough level, if he's going to be able to master him to a high enough level to get to the absolute pinnacle of the sport. You know, I'm questioning now. Now, look, at the same time, I want to leave the door open because, yes, the man is young. Yes, the man has a great team around him. Yes, he's working with a new trainer that I highly respect in Joe Goosen. He's done a lot of great work for fighters over the years. So I'm really intrigued to see, you know, what the finished product's going to be like. If he sticks with Goosen for the next 4 or 5 years, let's say, what's Ryan Garcia going to look like at that point? Right? He'd be like entering his physical prime, kind of at the peak of his physical prime. What would he really look like if he just dedicated himself in the gym, man? He was there. He was putting it in underneath the tutelage of a guy like that who could really, really speak to him and teach him these things. You know, I don't know. I want to have hope. I want to hold out hope that I'm going to be able to see great things from him in the future because it's awesome as a fan to be able to see a guy just reach his full potential and shine. But I don't know. Last night made me think. So we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Am I reading into this one a little bit too much? What did you think of that performance? Was it just ring rust because we haven't seen him in a while? Was it the type of opponent he was facing? Right? Styles make fights. And was it just like, hey, man, when you're facing a guy who wants to get on his bike that much, there's only so much you can do. Let me know what you guys think.